안녕하세요. 원장님 고양이 제니예요. 오늘은 해리포터 2권 해리포터 and the Chamber of Secrets 챕터 3 The Burrow 시작할게요. 냥! The Burrow. Run! breathed Harry, creeping through the window and pushing it out so he could toast to the bars. Ron, how did you... What the... Harry's mouth fell open as a full impact what was seen hit him. Ron was leaning out of the back window in the old Toke Boy's car, which was parked in mid-air. Grinning at Harry from the first seats were Fred and George, Ron's endorphin brothers. "All right, Harry?" "What's been going on?" said Ron. "Why haven't you been answering my letters? I asked you to stay about 3 times, and Dad came home and said you're gonna fish a warning you were using it for the muggles. It wasn't me." "And how did he know?" "He works for the ministry," said Ron. "You know we're not supposed to do spells outside the school." "With Rich coming through you," said Harry, staring at the floating car. "Oh, this doesn't count," said Ron. "Well, we're borrowing this. It's Dad's. We don't enchant it. But doing magic in front of the muggles you give it." "I told you I didn't." "And you could tell along to inflame now. Look, can you explain to the Hogwarts that Dursleys have locked me up and won't let me come back? And obviously, I can't magic myself out because Manster will think a second spell I've done 3 days. So stop gibbering," said Ron. "We'll come to take you home with us." "But you can't magic me out either." "We don't need to," said Ron, jerking his head towards the front step and grinning. "You forget what I've given me." "Tie that around the bars," said Fred, throwing the end of the rope to Harry. "If the Dursleys wake up, I'm dead," said Harry, as he tied the rope tightly around the bar and Fred ripped off the car. "Don't worry," said Fred, "and stand back." Harry moved back into the shadows next to Hagrid, who seemed to realize how important this was. Keep still and silent. The car revved louder and louder, and suddenly, with a crunching noise, the bars were pulled clean out of the window as Fred drove straight up into the air. Harry ran back to the stout bars dangling for a few feet around. Panting, Ron hoisting them up into the car. Harry listened anxiously, but there was no sound but Dursley's bedroom. When the bars were safely in the back seat with Ron reversed as close as possible to Harry's window. "Get in," Ron said. "But all my Hogwarts stuff, my wand, my broomstick." "Where is it?" "Locked in the cupboard under the stairs, and I can't go with you." "No problem," said George when the first peasant asleep. "Out of the way, Harry." Fred and George climbed carefully through the window into Harry's room. "You have to hand it to them," said Harry. With George like ordinary hand in Harry's pocket, he started to pick it up. "You stop tight doing such muggle trick," said Harry. "We feel their skills worth learning." If theirs are slow. There was a small click and the door slid open. "You read your trunk, you grabbed anything from you and handed it to Ron," whispered George. "Watch out for the bottom stair, it clicks," Harry whispered back as his string smoothed the dark landing. Harry dashed around the room, collecting his together and tossing up to the Ron. Then he ran to Fred and George heaved his trunk up the stairs. Harry heard Uncle Vernon cough. At last, panting, they reached the landing and carried it in the open window. Fred climbed back into the car to fool with Ron, and Harry and George pushed them in the bedside. Inch by inch, the trunk slid to the window. Uncle Vernon coughed again. "A bit more," panted Fred, who was rolling from inside the car. "One, good, push!" Harry and George threw their shoulders against the trunk and they slid out of the window into the back seat of the car. "Okay, let's go," George whispered. As Harry climbed on the windowsill, there came a sudden loud screech behind them. Immediately, it found the thunder of Uncle Vernon's voice. "Bloody owl! I forgot Hagrid!" Harry tore back across the room as the landing light clicked on. he searched up Hagrid's cage, dashed to the window, and passed it out to Ron. He was scrambling back onto the chest of drawers when Uncle Vernon hammered on the unlocked door and crashed open. For a split second, Uncle Vernon stood framing the doorway. Then he let out the bellow like an angry bull and dived at Harry, grabbing him by the ankle. Ron, Fred, and George seized Harry's arms, pulled as hard as they could. "Petunia!" roared Uncle Vernon. "He's getting away! He's getting away!" The Weasleys gave a gigantic tug, and Harry's leg slid out of Uncle Vernon's cross. As soon as Harry was in the car, they slammed the door shut. Ron yelled, "Put your foot down, Fred!" and the car shot suddenly towards the room. Harry couldn't believe it. He was free. He wound down the window in night air, whipping his hair, and looked back at the shrinking rooftops of Freebird Drive. Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and Dudley were all hanging dumbstruck out of Harry's window. "See you next summer!" Harry yelled. The Weasleys roared with laughter, and Harry settled back into seat, grinning from ear to ear. "Let Hedwig out," he told Ron. "She can fly behind us. She hasn't had a chance to stretch out away for ages." George handed the hatpin to Ron, and a moment later, Hedwig had soared joyfully out of the window to glide alongside them like a ghost. "So what's the story, Harry?" said Ron impatiently. "What's been happening?" Harry told them all about Dobby, the only fish fairy, and the fiasco of the violet pudding. There's a long, shocked silence with the fairies. "Very fishy," said Fred finally. "Definitely dodgy," agreed George. "So he wouldn't even tell you who's supposed to be plotting this stuff?" "I don't think he could," said Harry. "I told you, every time he got close to letting something slip, he started banging his head against the wall." So Fred and George looked at each other. "What do you think he was lying to me?" said Harry. "Well, put it this way. House elves have got powerful magic of their own, but they can't usually use it with their master's permission. I reckon old Dobby was sent to Suppian with coming back to Hogwarts. Someone's idea of joke. Can you think of anyone at school with a grudge against it?" "Yes," said Harry and Ron together instantly. "Draco Malfoy," Harry explained. "He hates me." "Draco Malfoy?" said George, turning around. "Not Lucius Malfoy's son?" "Must be. The common name, is it?" said Ron. "But they are talking about it," said George. "It was a bit supporter of you-know-who." "And when you-know-who disappears," said Fred, craning around to look at Harry, "Lucius Malfoy came back saying he never met any of it. Rodopdong was running you-know-who's inner circle." Harry had heard these rumors about Malfoy's family before, but it didn't spread it at all. Malfoy met Dudley Dursley like a kind, thoughtful, and sensitive boy. "I don't know whether Malfoy's on the house elf," said Harry. "Well, whoever is in with the old Wizard family, and they'll be rich," said Fred. "Yeah, Mom's always wishing he had a house built to the earning. Well, all we got was the old ghoul in the attic and gnomes around the garden. House elves come with big old manors and castles, places like that. You wouldn't catch one in our house." Harry was silent. Judging by the fact that Draco Malfoy usually had the best of everything, his family were rolling in wizard gold. He could just see Malfoy strutting around the large manor house. Sending the family servant to stop Harry going back to Hogwarts also sounded exactly like the sort of thing Malfoy would do. Had Harry been stupid to take Dobby seriously? "I got to the search anyway," said Ron. "I was getting rid of worry when you answered my letters. I thought yours were arrows at first." "What's arrow?" "Oh, he's ancient. He wouldn't earn the first time with collapse in delivery, and then tried to bother Hermes." "Who?" "The owl Mom and Dad bought Percy when he was a prefect," he said in the front. "Percy wouldn't lend him to me," said Ron. "Sandal needed him." "Percy's being Very ugly this summer, said George, frowning. Her has been sending a lot of feathers and spending a lot of time shut up in the room. I mean, there's just so many times that you polish a perfect badge. You've traveled too far west, Fred, he added, pointing at the compass of the dashboard. Retorting the street wheel. So, does your dad know you got the car? Said Harry, guessing the answer. No, said Ron. He had to work tonight. Hopefully we'll be the arrows with not noticing with know it. What do in the Ministry of Magic anyway? He works in the most boring department, said Ron. The Misuse of Muggle Artifact Office. The what? It's all to do with bewitching things that the Muggles made, or like it's not like a mobile shop or house. Last year, some rich guy and a tea sack was sold to Antisha. This Muggle woman bought it to be combed and started to serve her friend's tea in it for the nightmare that was looking weeks. What happened? The table went berserk and squirted boiling tea over her face. One man ended at the hospital with the sugar tongs covering his nose. Dad was going frantic. It's only him and old Warlock Perkins in the office. Memory charms and all sorts convoluted out. But your dad, this car. Fred laughed. Yeah, that's mad about everything to do with Muggles. I was just full of Muggle stuff. They take it apart, put spells on it, and put it back together again. Wait hours putting stuff stranded under a vest, driving mad. That's the main road, said George, peering down to the windscreen. They did that in 10 minutes, just well, getting right. A fantastic Glasgow. Fred boarded the car all over, and Harry saw a dark patch of open fields and clumps of trees. Very little away outside of it, said George. Other is uncatchable. Lower and lower, the filing cars. Edge of the brilliant red sun was now gleaming through the trees. Patch car, said Graham, and a slight bump, they hit the ground. They rendered each tumble down the roads and a small yard that Harry looked at from the first time, that Ron's house. It looked as though it was once being a large stone pigsty, with extra roofs that we added here and there, with several high and so crooked it looked held up by magic, which Harry reminded himself it probably was. 4 or 5 chimneys were perched on top of the red roof. A lopsided sign stuck in the ground near the entrance read "The Burrow." Around the front door were a jumble of grating to brooks and very rusty cauldron. Several fat brown chickens were pecking their way up the road. It's not much, said Ron. It's brilliant, said Harry happily, thinking of a pretty big drive. They got out of the car. No, we'll go upstairs really quietly, said Fred, and wait for Mom to force for breakfast. And Ron, you come bounding downstairs, going, Mom, nothing turned off in the night. And she'll be all pleased to Harry, and no one will ever know we flew the hall. Right, said Ron. Come on, Harry. I spent at the... Ron had got a nasty greenish color, and his eyes freaking across. The other 3 wheeled around. Mrs. Weasley was marching across the yard, scattering chickens. Her short, gaunt, kind-faced woman. It was remarkable how much she looked like a saber-toothed tiger. Ah, said Fred. Oh dear, said George. Mrs. Weasley came to the hearth in front of them, her hands on her hips, staring from one guilty face to the next. She was wearing a flower apron with a wand sticking out of the pocket. So, she said. Morning, Mom, said George, in what he clearly thought it was a jaunty, winning voice. Have you any idea how worried I've been? Said Mrs. Weasley in a deadly whisper. Sorry, Mom, but see, we had to... All 3 of Mrs. Weasley's sons were taller than she was, but they cowered as the words broke over them. Bags empty! No notes! Car gone! Could I crashed out of my mind word worry? Did you care? Never, as long as I've been live you. Wait. your father gets home. We would never bad trouble like this from Bill or Charlie or Percy. 챕터 3-2에서 만나요. 안녕.